Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the viaduct and the fact now that it's actually being torn down. It is giving people a time and a chance to reflect. I don't really recall the viaduct that well because obviously we moved here some 5, 6 years ago. So it's not as deep for me as it is for some people. Some people have a strong affinity for it because they have to drive it every single day. And let's understand the reason why there was a viaduct. I mean, I've mentioned before in a previous video about the viaduct actually being closed and how it's going to impact traffic and yada, yada, yada. Well, the first day, I should say, everything was cool. After that, it's been a little difficult. But since then, people have adjusted, right? Well, the reason for the whole viaduct was because prior to that, everything was done on city streets. Seattle is a port city and by the sea. So basically, it is a city that relied heavily on cargo, freight moving in and out of the area. So downtown was really gridlocked even back in the day. We're talking 100 years ago. There was still gridlock in downtown Seattle. So what we're dealing with at this particular point in time was a way to kind of thin that out and get rid of some of that congestion. So there's really no active plans on how to actually do that back in the day. We're talking, it wasn't quite 100 years ago, but we're talking like the early 20s, 1926 or so, right? So the city had to deal with the gridlock, which actually hampered business, and it literally created a massive nightmare. All the city streets were just clogged. So there were plans put in place later on, and that never changed. It hasn't changed to this day. Seattle has always had traffic issues. Well, as the city grew and the population ballooned, it became much more of a problem, and there was plans to actually create a viaduct. And if you were considered, and I talked about this before, to be considered a big city or a world-class city, you needed to have pretty much a viaduct, a double-decker highway system. And many cities did this. I mentioned San Francisco is one of them, New York, Chicago, a lot of places. They did that, and Seattle was no different. Tacoma kind of did it a little bit. We still got a little bit of one, but basically that was kind of seen to be the best thing. That was controversial when it was built. People thought at the time it was ugly. They thought it kind of separated downtown from the waterfront. It was kind of like a wall, if you will, like a partition. And they also felt like when it was being developed, a lot of business owners didn't really take too kindly to the fact that now, instead of having one problem of too much traffic and gridlock, but yet you're still getting foot traffic, that now they have an issue of people speeding by on the highway. So they didn't want that. So there was controversy over where would the on and off ramps be and all of that type of stuff. And some people say, well, I don't want all these cars pooling in my area. And so, the typical stuff that people fight about even today. So those things were apparent. It took the project about 15 years or so, 15 and a half years to get completed. Started in the 50s or 1950 and got completed in the late 60s, around 66 or so. And so they built the entire thing. They built it out of concrete and steel, and it was considered to be a big happening thing. Well, the very first day, it was jam-packed with cars. You know what I mean? Like, ever since it has actually been open, the viaduct has always had a load of cars. And it became a symbol of the city. It's kind of not so much like what you expect with some of the common iconic symbols of the city. You see the Space Needle, that's kind of iconic. Key Arena for some is kind of iconic, and Smith Tower is iconic. But really and truly, the viaduct is kind of iconic too, because it basically sparked a whole new era, and it was done out of necessity. And technically, that wasn't the only one they wanted to do. They wanted to have two viaducts, one running exactly where the viaduct is today, and then they wanted one running roughly where I-6, or actually I-5 runs today. They wanted to have two, because the concern was downtown was so congested in this one area around the waterfront, they wanted to have a way for cars to dissipate pretty easily. But as the city grew and downtown grew, where you see I-5 today, they wanted another viaduct there to kind of get people out of the way, because that section of downtown was also starting to fill up with people as well, right? So instead of building another viaduct, they just basically built I-5, and it was a mostly surface level highway. Well, due to various different things, the viaduct, which is not that old, it's less than 60 years old, but the viaduct basically had a lot of limitations. You know, it was very functional in what it was doing and its purpose. It was very limited. You couldn't expand it in any sort of way. If you wanted to repair it, it would take a tremendous amount of money to do so. The soil, as you get closer to water, typically is not that good anywhere. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's here or California or, Japan or South Africa. The closer you get to the soil, or closer you get to the sea or water, typically the soil base is not that great. Well, given that we're also in an earthquake area, it doesn't help. So the combination of soil conditions and the combination of earthquakes has created a problem for the viaduct, and it really and truly damaged it when we had the Nisqually earthquake not that long ago. So it has always been on the drawing board to replace the viaduct, and again, it just like before, when they actually started the planning process, it took forever to plan for the replacement of the viaduct, and it took forever to literally get it constructed, and we're still working on that construction to this day, even though the viaduct is closed, and it should be open relatively soon, where I'm speaking as of January the 26th, of 2019. So, it's been a long road. But here's one of the things. The viaduct will go away. I mean, they're tearing it down, they're chewing it up, and they're getting rid of it. And soon, all of that traffic will go underneath the city in a tunnel. And just like back in the day, people said this is the best solution. Well, who knows? In 60 years from now, people will say the tunnel is probably the worst thing they could have done. We don't know, right? But the tunnel is going to be different because it literally will charge you a toll to actually use it. I don't think a lot of people are going to use that if the toll is too high. I don't know what the toll is, to be honest with you. But that kind of turns people off. And again, in Seattle, yeah, people do have decent money, but your money is stretched pretty thin. So using it for things like tolls is really not going to be a good look. There's limited tolls in the city to begin with. I mean, one of the tolls is heading over towards Bellevue, but other than that, you don't see a lot of toll roads in the city, and that could change with Mayor Durkin. I kind of talked about that and what her plans are, which I think is probably definitely the wrong thing to do. But it leads to something else. A lot of the businesses along the viaduct chose that area because history, one. A lot of them like the area because it has a long history there. Some of them have been there since the construction of the viaduct. Some of them have been there prior to the viaduct. And then some go there because the rents right there are a little bit more affordable than other parts of downtown. Why? Well, you have a big giant concrete monument of a highway right in front of you. And it's noisy. So people who go there to the various businesses, they have to deal with 100,000 cars passing overhead every single day. And it's very loud because you got to understand, it's a pancake type of situation. You have two freeways on top of one another. And traffic's flowing in one direction on the top, heading actually towards downtown, and below is heading out of downtown. It's no longer the case. And so you also have a amplifier effect because the sound on the cars below amplify up. And because they can't escape, it escapes out to the sides. Well, out to the sides is water on one side, which is fine. But to the other side, there's buildings, and so it just hits buildings and travels down. Then when you have other cars that are running around on the street, on street level, guess what? The sound travels up, but it smacks into the freeway and it reverberates back down. So it's just a loud, noisy area. And eventually people get used to it. So as a result, prices and property there is not as expensive. But tearing it down and putting in a very nice park promenade stretch, which is what they're going to do, is going to really and truly jack up the price of retail and office space. It just will. Any apartment, any building along that area is going to see a huge price increase. Why? Well, because now there's no unobstructed views to the water. You can look out and see the waterfront, which is kind of what has been the complaint for over 50 years. And now you also have the ability to connect the waterfront. You can just literally walk. You know, like there's you could do that before without too much of a problem, but you're able to see it. You're able to visualize it. People from office buildings can actually look out and not see concrete, but actually see the waterfront. It's an unobstructed view. So the prices are going to go up. Now you have true lakefront property in one of the most expensive cities in the country. So of course rents are going to go up. So you add in all the amenities that they're going to do in terms of adding the nice, beautiful park and that type of thing, you're going to definitely increase the cost. Right? Just is. So that lends to the question, what will happen to a lot of those businesses? Don't know. Seattle, and here's the thing, real estate is so relative based on what happens. So one major thing can cause a massive ripple effect. There's parts of downtown that are so pricey just because of Amazon, for example. Amazon builds these very unique buildings, so the price goes up. I haven't done a video yet, but there's a video that I'm going to do that talks about this developer, this billionaire developer out of Vancouver, who's building these unique towers. They look like art pieces, and these are big, huge, massive buildings. Those buildings themselves will also help escalate the price wherever they are. And now you have the waterfront improvement, just the promenade by itself is going to make prices there along a long 2-mile stretch very pricey. So for those companies that really and truly can't afford, and some of these are social services type companies or businesses, so it's going to be a very difficult thing. A lot of them will have to relocate. Downtown's probably not going to be it. And pretty soon, most of Seattle is not going to be it. Some of these companies have been really a big part of Seattle for a long time. And a lot of people aren't liking the way Seattle is changing because they remember a time when it wasn't like it is today. Now, I only know Seattle as it is. I don't know any Seattle differently. There are people who are my age who remember Seattle back when they graduated high school and what it was like and how it was completely different. We've watched videos that showed the history of Seattle and how it looked even back in when I was born. And it looked completely different. You didn't have nearly the downtown today that you did back in 1978. It just didn't exist. So the city has just changed so drastically, and it's still changing quite a bit. And so to some people, they don't really like that. They don't like, not so much the buildings and that type of thing, it's just the whole vibe, the cost of living. It's no longer a place where you can just simply afford it. Everything there is changing. I hate to reference Tacoma, but I'm going to have to. Tacoma is kind of Seattle of 30 years ago. to be honest with you, in bits and pieces. When you leave down to exclude downtown, basically Tacoma is Seattle 30 years ago, many people have said. If you look at the surrounding neighborhoods and everything, that is kind of the vibe of what Seattle used to be. Now, there are obviously major changes and major differences and that type of thing, but that's kind of the culture. You didn't have the super elites. You didn't have that. You had wealthy people, which we do have a lot of wealthy people here. But it wasn't like it is today. And now, Seattle is this corporate city. It's really changed. The whole culture has changed. The mom and pop shops are starting to peel away, and now you have the rich uncle and rich aunt shops that show up, and it becomes a little bit of a different vibe. With the viaduct closing down, I think that's the fear of a lot of people, is that stretch of neighborhood is now going to definitely change forever, and it will. And that you no longer have mom and pop places, you now have the rich uncle or rich aunt shops that will dot along that area, and it makes great sense. But anyhow, just wanted to give you a little bit of my commentary about the whole deconstruction of the viaduct. I understand the reason why they're doing it. I think that it makes good sense to actually get rid of it. For one, it's in bad repair. It needs a lot of work to keep it functioning, and it costs more to replace it and to do things with it than to just tear it down. I don't agree with the tolls. I think that that's not a good fit. I know they're trying to repay the cost of that tunnel, but that's going to be a long toll. It'll be around much longer than I'm going to be alive. So, anyhow, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, I will see you. Take care.